is the special CRA work session for Monday, August 24th. And the time is 10:01 a.m. And let's call this meeting to order. And we'll jump right into the meeting. Mr. Rue, do you want to take us where you want us to go?
Absolutely. So commissioners, I believe the agenda today, we are going to discuss mainly three items. We will discuss the CRA budget for the Northwood Pleasant City area. We will discuss the budget for the city center budget. And then because the city center budget includes a contribution to the Downtown Development Authority, Raphael will then give a presentation of the DDA's budget as the third item. And then from there, happy to answer any questions or comments that you may have. So with that, I will jump right into it. Allison is also on with us today. So she's here for support to add a little bit more additional detail to the budget in case you all have any questions as well. So with that, let me, whoop, I'm already messing up. One moment. Help if I share the screen first. Okay. Are you all able to see my screen? Great. Okay, so as I mentioned, get this squared away for a sec. Okay. Okay, the West Palm Beach, Northwood Pleasant City CRA budget. I do want to start out with just kind of giving a sort of level set of both budgets, and just kind of as a quick educational for everybody out there watching, is that the West Palm Beach CRA, when we talk about funding and structure, gets its funding from two main sources, and those sources are the taxable value that is generated and the taxes levied by Palm Beach County, which is approximately 4.7 mils or $4.70 for every $1,000 of taxable value. And then the second is obviously the city of West Palm Beach's tax levy, which is about 8.6 mils. So when you extrapolate that out over all the values of the areas of the CRA, those boundaries, you get these different amounts which fund the CRA. Now, we have to use these dollars for very specific purposes. They have to be used within the boundaries of the CRAs that have been established through studies and boundaries that were set back when the CRA was first established. And then there's very strict guidelines by which the state of Florida says we can use those dollars for. And therefore, community redevelopment efforts to build things, to update infrastructure and things like that. And those are all laid out in a very specific work plan that is adopted by the CRA board that we have to use those fundings for. So those extra dollars that we get for the county, if the CRA were to, one day it will eventually dissolve, we will lose those tax increment financing dollars that we get from the county, which you can see in the two areas that the CRA has is about 13.4 million for downtown, and then another $1.5 million that we get for the Northwood Pleasant City areas. So those dollars that we get from the county are really critical into helping us achieve our goals in these specific areas. And we have to use them for specific items. We can't simply use them to do regular city operations or efforts that I think could help us really balance the budget. They have to be used for specific purposes that the state of Florida allows us to use through that enabling legislation. Are there any questions on that? Great. All right. So now I'll get into the nuts and bolts of the Pleasant City CRA. So most of you know this, but these are the boundaries that are set for the Northwood Pleasant City area. You can see the different areas that we've broken it down, including Currie Park, Northwood Village, Pleasant City, the industrial area, and then the long spine that goes up to 59th Street, which is the Broadway corridor. So the sources of revenue, we've seen about a 4% increase in the budget this year. And that's that 4.3 million that comes from the tax increment of those two sources that I had just outlined, the city funds and the county funds. So that matched with the carry forward balance, which includes a lot of projects and services that are currently being provided. We look at an estimated source of about 9.4 million. And then the uses that we spend those dollars for, and this list is a little bit longer in the city center budget, but you can see it broken down here. And the two main line shares of these uses include the debt service that we've taken for projects in the past, and also target area initiatives, which include all of the services that we are going to provide and all the projects that we're currently underway in the Pleasant City Northwood area. We have increased the reserve for future projects a little bit, namely because understanding that the pandemic will have an impact on the CRA's budget in future years. We bumped that up a little bit so that we can use that for the projects that we need for next year, and it could be used for additional debt service or the projects that are currently underway. So those will be used, and it's just sort of a placeholder right now as we see how the pandemic shakes out. But you can see there that $700,000 are the reserves for future projects. This just breaks down the bonds that we're currently paying for, that debt service that I had mentioned, and gives you an idea of the past items that we have undertaken and that we are currently still paying for on an annual amount. Any questions on that? Great. So looking at the Pleasant City area, we've allocated about $384,000. And I do want to say, like, as I go through this budget, obviously this is a work session, so I welcome any feedback on this budget. But as we bring these different projects and activities through the coming years, or through this year, you know, some of these projects may shifting dollar amounts based on needs set by the CRA board. So this is sort of a jumping off point for this fiscal year. But as we get into the nuts and bolts we bring forward some new ideas and initiatives, we may shift dollars to different areas. So if you see amounts that maybe you're not comfortable with, you know, these dollars are anticipated to shift a little bit throughout the year. But those would be brought forward for discussion items by the CRA board.
Chris,
yes,
before you go on, there are two things that I want to identify for the record. The one is, and I should have said this earlier, when we look at the boundaries of the CRA, we should not overlook the fact that Coleman Park is not included in our CRA for whatever reason. And I think that's probably some of the things that my task force will be getting into. Do you want to add anything to that and the significance of that omission?
Well, I think if there was a way that that we could include the Coleman Park area, obviously it's an area of need, especially that corridor along Tamarind Avenue between Palm Beach Lakes and 25th Street. The city, I mean, we've got, I think, a great foundation that starts there with commercial properties that both the city owns and that are privately held. And it essentially links the two CRAs into a much larger district, which frankly, the two areas operate in different manners. I mean, obviously there's different residents that live in each one, but there's a lot of flow through between the two communities. So it would make sense to connect them through Coleman Park. And then Coleman Park, just in and of itself, is a great little community that I think just needs a little bit of assistance through a CRA that I think could be beneficial to that area.
And when we look at the history of this city and decisions that have been made in terms of racial inequities, I think the omission of Coleman Park from the CRA is one that we will have, we as a city will have to grapple with going forward. The other thing is, Chris, on the bond slide that you had, I think it was just the previous one. We refinanced 16,500,000 in 2015. Do you know when those bonds expire?
I don't have that on my head. Allison, do you happen to know the date of when those bonds expire?
Yeah, maturity date is 2035.
2035?
Correct.
Okay, and the ones we just did last year mature when?
2046 at the end. They go through the end of the downtown CRA.
Okay, all right. Okay, very good. Commissioner Nearing had a comment.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to add on to Chris, to your points, and I'm sure our Commission President could articulate this probably better. But we also have a group of there in Coleman Park, a group of committed residents who have been doing the work regardless, but have asked this question to your point, Mayor, for quite some time. So I think when the confluence of all of those things coming together, I think it is a prime location for that consideration.
Armando Fana had a point on Coleman Park.
Yes, Mayor, thank you. Just quickly, just to point out that yes, although Coleman Park is not in the CRA district, and that's certainly something we should look at and go over. I just wanted to point out a couple things. One is that there has been a significant amount of investment from the city through the HUD programs, that we do get grants in that neighborhood. So that has helped balance some of that out, because we tend to concentrate in that neighborhood because of that very issue. And also that area also is in an opportunity zone, which we're trying to take advantage of on a couple of things I'm working on now. Whereas the areas that are Pleasant City and Historic Northwest are not an opportunity zone. So I just wanted to point that out, that we do have a little bit of balance with some of the other things.
Thank you, and I appreciate you pointing that out. But I don't think there's any, while I appreciate those investments, I don't think that they rise to the level that Coleman Park probably could have benefited from historically, had they been in the CRA district. Those numbers, I don't think, are going to be equivalent. But I appreciate everything the city has done historically through the HCD, and to get to provide to attempt to level the playing field. But I think there's still work to be done, and I appreciate that. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for bringing up this topic, and thank you, Commissioner Nearing, for your comments as well. As the district commissioner of this district, this is a conversation that's been ongoing for a while, and I just want to point out too that one of the important things that would happen if we were able to include Coleman Park within the CRA district is that it would make one contiguous district from the downtown district into Northwood Pleasant City, which is one of the requirements for a CRA. And so there may be the opportunity to have one CRA throughout the city of West Palm Beach, which would allow us to take the benefits of development that we've been experiencing over the last several years and spread them equitably to really use CRA dollars to improve communities that don't have that kind of vibrancy that our downtown does. So I think it would allow us a lot more flexibility. So if we were able to include Coleman Park, it would create that bridge between the Northwood Pleasant City CRA and the downtown Historic Northwest CRA. That would be the availability to make it one contiguous CRA. So to the extent that I can be helpful, I've been supportive of that concept for a very long time. I'd be happy to give input or do whatever I can to make that a reality.
Thank you. And as I understand it, we would need the county consent to that, right, Mr. Rugg or Allison?
That is correct.
Okay, all right. Certainly something to look at. Commissioner Peduzzi.
Thank you, Mayor. That was essentially going to be my question: is what would the process look like? I'm not looking for, an in-depth or detailed, explanation, but how would that process take place?
Yeah, I think, there's, again, going back to Chapter 163, there's very specific rules that are set out. And what I can do is set out sort of the roadmap of what that would look like, but it does involve a general study of the area, and then an analysis, and then essentially, I guess, an application process through which is ultimately approved by the state. and the funding parties, which include the city and county. So, but I'm happy to bring those details back for further discussion, so that we can lay that out if the CRA board would like to move in that direction.
Okay, very good. I don't see any further questions. Continue, Mr. Rue. Apologize
Sure.
for setting you off track.
No problem. It's a good topic. Okay. Talked about Pleasant City. So the Currie corridor, I do want to pause here for a moment, namely because any items that are a little bit larger, I do want to spend a little bit of time just kind of talking through some of those details so that the CRA board and the community understand why these items maybe are a little bit larger. So as you can see, the Currie Park infrastructure, we have set aside a budget of $2.6 million for that. And it's primarily for the planning and design of the park. We don't anticipate that we will need that much. So that's a good example of an area where maybe we can come back at a later point in the year and determine where we could reallocate some of those dollars. But understanding that we are chasing some grants for the construction of the park, namely on the infrastructure, and until we get a good handle on what exactly those costs are going to be for design and construction, we just want to leave that placeholder there for this year. But as we get a better handle on it, that's a good example of an item that you could see coming back to provide more direction on how we spend those dollars that perhaps might be left over from that project. Any questions on the Currie Park? Mayor, you're on mute.
We do have a question from Madam President.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Chris, for this slide too. And everyone I know is very excited about the future of Currie Park. But I just wanted to point out, because I know that is a big number in Currie Park, that the Currie corridor encompasses more than Currie Park. So could you elaborate on that a little bit too, just to make sure that everyone's under the understanding that it's not specifically in the Currie Park area. This is the Currie corridor. So there are other developments, et cetera, that are happening within that corridor.
That's a good point. The Currie corridor is, from a zoning standpoint, consistent with the Currie mixed use district, which is, as you alluded to, much larger. And I believe, without having a zoning map hot in my hand, I believe goes between North Dixie Highway to the intercoastal. And I think the northern boundary is right around 25th Street, but I may have to check that fact. And those funds can be used for that entire corridor. And in the past, we have talked with developers about perhaps, shifting roadways. And as you can see in this image, one of the idea was creating that view corridor down Northwood Road between the anchor site and Currie Park, so that you have this very nice linear corridor for commercial and residential activities. And that's a good example of something where we would use some of those dollars potentially for. Now, again, we don't have those plans. This was just sort of a general visioning, rendering of what could be. And that would require relocating or shifting around Joel Daves Park. So it's, as you had mentioned, Commissioner, yes, the Currie Park corridor is much larger than just Currie Park.
Okay, go ahead, Chris.
Northwood Village, here I do a couple of line items to mention, and is the anchor site, which you will be seeing shortly come forward. That is, those negotiations for that development site are wrapping up on the contract, so you will be seeing that here shortly. And we have allocated funding because that's anticipated to have a public garage for parking that is our dollars used from the CRA. The private security number, that $550,000, that has gone up a little bit, anticipating extra costs, but that's to maintain the level of service that has been recommended and asked for by the local businesses along Northwood Village. And we anticipate that we will continue that level of service with PSC, namely having 3 officers on a regular basis patrolling and just maintaining security in the Northwood Village area. The industrial park, this is an area that actually, speaking with some of the members of the CRA advisory board, have expressed interest in taking a deeper look at. Another good example of where we could increase the cost of spending a bit more dollars in this area, namely for economic development activities. And then lastly, Broadway target area. I think the primary focus for this is going to be looking at those zoning regulations. Although I do want to take a moment to express a little bit of just, I think, concern as we're looking at those zoning regulations, namely for one thing, and that's being able to affect the people that we're trying to help in the north end of the city. So recently there was an initiative where the folks with RISE were trying to increase home ownership, and they had provided down payment assistance. Unfortunately, they were not successful in helping the people that they were targeting, namely because they weren't able to qualify. And why that affects the BMUD regulations is because if we unlock development opportunities along BMUD, but the folks that we're trying to help aren't ready for home ownership, we may run into issues where we don't actually help the people that we're trying to help in the community and displace folks. So as we move forward, we're going to be very diligent and careful about making sure that when those folks are ready, and luckily the RISE group and folks in the north end are doing what they can to get those folks ready for home ownership, then I think at that point it'll be prudent to move forward with the zoning regulations to really unlock that development potential. The good news is that there's actually new projects being slated for Broadway. There was a recent one that actually came forward. So as Broadway seems to be getting more attention in recent months, and that's a good sign for the corridor. And then lastly, under other targeted areas, this is just a general line items for funding sources that we can use in any of the areas that we just covered. That are extra placeholders, so that extra $225,000 can be spread out amongst and across the Pleasant City, Northwood Village, Industrial, and Broadway corridor, and Currie Park for a variety of needs for that area.
Chris, we have a question from Commissioner Neary.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Mr. Rue. Could you remind me again how, for example, on this last slide, consultants, landscape maintenance, are the decision as to who gets those maybe smaller contracts, or is that CRA driven, Mr. Rue?
Generally, some of the smaller line items may just be administrative approvals. For instance, we have a good example is I think there was a trash can that was needed along the Broadway corridor. So we have a line item where we can dip into those dollars quickly and easily to deploy, things that are needed or that we've identified as a need. On the landscape maintenance, that's another good one. It is a little bit of a larger item, but that's if, for instance, we need to utilize our landscape contractor and get them out there to perform some type of service, we have the funds able to deploy it quickly.
So, Commissioner, if I can elaborate on that a little bit, the CRA has a contract with Michael Johns. This is through the city. This was done through the city's procurement process. So we're on with the city on that contract to clean Northwood Village and Broadway. They pick up trash. The CRA also went out for an RFP on landscape maintenance for Northwood Village and along Spruce, and that contract is with Scott Lewis. And he won the bid on that about a year ago. So.
Your follow-up, Commissioner?
No, I'm good. Thank you, Mayor.
Madam President, you had a question on Broadway?
Yes, and on the trash can on Broadway, that was a very important trash can, and I want to say thank you to Allison, Sarah, and Chris for putting that together because it was sorely needed and much appreciated. To my question on Broadway, I know our target areas are legally defined, but when it comes to Broadway, one of the things that I've discussed with residents and the CR advisory board is trying to make sure that we're distributing our resources equitably. up and down Broadway, so that being that it's a very narrow stretch as opposed to our other districts that are wider, sometimes our resources could be concentrated on the south end or the north end disproportionately. So is there a way that we can define, North Broadway, South Broadway, and at least be able to report back on the distribution of funds throughout this specific target area?
Yes, because you're right, Commissioner. I mean, I've received those same comments that, from 59th to 45th feels much different between 45th and 36th and 36th to 25th. So, yeah, I mean, we could bring in or perhaps bring in a bit more detail of how that Broadway corridor is broken down. Frankly, we're probably going to need to do that anyways, especially as talks with FDOT increase about the road redesign, and definitely as we start getting into the nuts and bolts of BMUD, the Broadway mixed use zoning district. I think we're going to have a little bit more analysis on the context of the different sections of Broadway. So I can schedule that for a future discussion if you like.
Thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Rugg. I don't see the other questions at this time.
Okay, with that, that wraps up the Northwood Pleasant City area budget.
Let me do one more appeal. Any questions, board members, on the Northwood portion of this presentation? Okay, I don't see anything, so proceed.
Great. Because they are two separate items here. Okay. Are you all able to see that?
Yes.
Should say Downtown City Center CRA. Okay, great.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so similar to the presentation that you just saw, these are the boundaries, or sorry, this is the main boundaries for the city center budget item for the CRA. So as you can see, very large, includes lots of different areas, the Northwest, Brailsford Park, Clearlake District, Downtown Core, and Okeechobee Corridor. So there's funding that is sort of spread out amongst these areas. The lion's share of funding is spent in the the historic Northwest, with lots of projects that are underway, and you'll see a map here moving forward. A couple of spoiler alerts. I think, again, in that spirit of, this is a jumping off point, because I think you're going to see a lot of sort of funding shift around throughout the year. Namely, a good example is in the Brailsford Park, we have a private venture underway there. And they are already in talks of looking at the infrastructure in that area, namely along Railroad Avenue. And they're very excited for it. And they've got some really good planning aspects that I think they're going to look for the CRA to partner with them on. That, along with the Clearlake District and what we're doing with Mike Masanoff and the planning. So there's lots of things happening in and around this area. I will say what I'd like to see is that where possible, we can shift that funding north of Banyan and really focus CRA attention where we can north of Banyan Boulevard, namely because south of Banyan Boulevard is the DDA is doing a great job of taking care of that area. I think is really important, because those seem to be the areas of need currently, namely the Northwest and Brailsford Park area, where we can continue to push the goals that we're trying to achieve through the CRA. So we had a 2.4% increase this year in the tax increment. That's the $39 million that is generated both through the county and city tax increment dollars that are collected. The carry forwards seem large, but that 17 million is really set aside for a lot of encumbered projects and initiatives that are currently underway by the CRA, and you'll see that here in a moment. And then the carry forward on the bond is significant because we are going to be doing a lot of bonded projects, and we're still spending those dollars through infrastructure items that are scheduled to begin. On the uses side, you can see, again, the lion's share is going to be that 11 million for debt service. On the tax increment split, moving forward, you'll see in the future a list of how that is broken down. The 5.2 is namely spent on tax increment dollars that we share with Related for Rosemary Square and a lot of the improvements that have occurred through the streets and just the public realm in that area. Some of the other ones, you can see the 2.9 million for innovative policing. That's where we work with our police department. And then the 4.7 that we share with the DDA for their work plan, which Raphael will speak to at the end of this presentation. At the end, you can see the reserves for future projects. Again, that's along the same theme that I mentioned with Northwood Pleasant City. We are keeping that a little bit higher than what we normally would, namely to ensure that the projects that we have underway and the debt service that we need to fund for next year, we have the money available to do that. And that $4 million is just to keep a little bit of an extra reserve. So until we anticipate how we can how the pandemic has shaken out. Now, we do have anticipated projects that we can fund if the pandemic doesn't show to be as severe as needed. Those projects will be obviously taken on a case-by-case basis and shared with the CRA board prior to allocating how those funds are spent.
Chris,
that's a lot. So yeah, go ahead, Mayor.
Actually, go back to the previous slide. I want to talk about previous slide, the increase. Do you know, we had a 2.4 increase last year. Do we know historically, is that around the same? Is that lower than normal? I don't know if you have numbers like over the past 5 years, running average type of thing.
I think historically it's about on par, but Allison, do you have to?
Since 2012, when the city the country came out of the recession, we really didn't start seeing increases until 2011, 2012, really. The last couple years, we've had up to 10, 11% increases. Now, when you're talking about downtown, though, a lot of that comes from new construction. So when something like the Park Line comes online or Old City Hall next year, you'll see a spike in the property values simply because of the new construction. So it really fluctuates from year to year based on what new construction is coming on. But we've had increases since 2012. This is probably one of our lower years, though, I would say. So.
And looking in the crystal ball because of the pandemic, well, you said we got a couple of big new projects coming on, so that should help that number somewhat.
That'll help. Yeah. Next year, we are anticipating, obviously, that property values may take a hit next year. I think the bigger concern, obviously, for the city as well is people paying their property taxes. That's another concern. We may get the values out of them, but we have to receive the revenues as well. So, yeah, I think there's a couple new buildings coming on, so we'll still see, hopefully, an increase. I would say your increases will be a little bit lower the next couple of years due to maybe some property value hits.
So we should probably be more conservative in our spending, at least.
Correct.
Going forward. Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Chris. Mr. Root, sorry.
Okay. Any other questions on uses?
Yeah, Commissioner Fox has a question.
Thank you. And thank you, Mayor. Earlier you mentioned when we were talking about Coleman Park, possibly the members of your racial equality team working, on looking at Coleman Park. And I also just wondered if, when we're looking at the reserve for future projects, if they might be involved in some other aspects. Like I know that some of the areas where you were focusing, health, workforce development, education, housing, I think, obviously all of those things are probably in our CRA districts where we could really find better ways to be more equitable. I know that Chris and Allison and I this morning were discussing a couple of healthcare facilities that were sort of walk-in clinics, both in the historic Northwest and in the North End Rise area. I just was wondering if the reserve for future projects could be utilized for things that might come out of your task force.
Well, the task force will be making specific policy recommendations, which will come before this board as the CRA and certainly before the city commission. I won't begin to suggest what those look like. That's why we have the task force, and we'll see what body of work they come up with, what their recommendations are. It may include something along those lines. I wouldn't be surprised, but I don't want to be presumptuous. So that's a very fair question, and we'll see what they come up with. Okay,
Okay.
Mr. Rube, I think you can continue.
Sure.
I don't see any other questions.
So as I mentioned, the historic Northwest is where most of the activity is occurring in the city center boundaries. So there's the list of all of the projects that are underway. The one that I do want to draw a little bit of note to will be the Tamarind Avenue streetscape. That is, and you'll see that line item here in a few slides, but I think that will be a project that you'll see a little bit more detail in a future meeting. So far I've heard nothing but positive comments about that project moving forward. A couple of other ones, the business incentives for the Grand. Those developers, this is a $9 million line item. That's a very exciting project, and those developers continue to move forward and have expressed that their financing is healthy and that they were currently planning the interior design of the project. So very exciting that the projects, specifically the residential ones, seem to be moving along nicely. So Northwest target area, we'd be remiss not to include a specific slide for the Sunset Lounge. And I do want to spend a little bit of time on this one because there is a large line item here for that $1 million for Sunset Lounge operations. Now, we are in the middle of a pandemic, and understanding that essentially the uses that the Sunset Lounge we're anticipating, which is event venue and restaurant, are a bit concerning, in light of the pandemic. So that $1 million, although we don't believe that we will need all of it, I think is a prudent line item, mainly because I see the CRA having to carry the facility at least for the short term in order to make sure that we get the right operations in place and see how the business plan fleshes out. And we identify the appropriate way that there's an operator established for the facility that and the community does know that this facility has gone back in the hands of the African American community. So a lot more work needs to be done on this, and you will see, I think it's probably worth having its own separate meeting to discuss those future operations, so that not only the CRA board, but the community at large, we all are very clear about how this will be successful in future years. So, any questions, comments? Okay, great. That is a marquee project, not only for the CRA, but for the city at large.
Before you move off, Commissioner Neering has a comment to make.
Thank you, Mayor. Chris, you said it, but I think it can't be overstated, really making sure that we set aside time to really delve into what that looks like. I don't need to tell you that as a part of this project, that aspect in terms of what does the programming look like. Now, 6 months ago, we probably thought a lot differently than we think today. Doesn't matter. Regardless, I think having the community be a part of it, and also this board in terms of ultimately making the decision on what that looks like when it's all said and done will be really important. So I'm glad to hear you say that. Appreciate it.
Madam President had a question.
Thank you, Mayor. Similar to those lines, I think that there's a number of operators here locally, and what is keenly important is making sure that the operations of this stays local. But also, Chris, if we could, during that future discussion, talk about what the timeline is for the longevity of this. So what is our plan, being that the CRA is not an entertainment venue operator? What does that look like going forward? So I know that those are two really big topics, and so not for today, but when we have those discussions, if we could kind of have our eye out to the future as well.
Agreed. And I'll say that we have been doing due diligence on that. We have a good start on a business plan of what the restaurant looks like, but yeah, I mean, there's so much more to it than simply that. I mean, there's a lot of coordination that can be happened with the arts and with performances, as well as making sure that the community is integrated on a regular basis. So agreed. And all of that, I think, is having a good conversation about those details is important, and we'll bring that forward soon.
Mayor, if I may follow up on that as well.
Yes.
And Chris, thank you. I'm glad that we're looking at a business plan on this too, but even to the extent of having a business plan, I think it's important to engage the local community to make sure that the business plan that we have for the Sunset is culturally sensitive. I think there's various ways of usage of this building, and so I think it's important to have that input from square one.
Yeah, this could be a great example of how we include the economic equity into the place. If the local residents and business owners are able to participate in the success of it, and they're able to share in that prosperity, I think then we've definitely achieved our goals. So completely agree, and that'll be something we're going to take a very close look at.
Very good. Continue, Mr. Rue.
Continuing under the Northwest target area, there's just, again, more, you can see the sticks shotgun houses. That's a pure economic development initiative where, we're creating these places for small businesses and local entrepreneurs to set up shop. The grant, that's that $9 million incentive. That's the big number that has been allocated and already set aside by the CRA board. That continues to move forward, and those developers are excited. Under the NCAT, I do want to pause there. That $5 million is still available, and that will be another agreement that will be brought forward to the CRA board for discussion, because there will need to be some prescriptive terms that will be established in order to how those funds were going to be used. The NCAT board for West Palm Beach is working very hard right now to chase grants and raise funds for that facility. This summer, they actually kicked off their program and had, I believe, about 16 students that participated in their arts program. And they're continuing discussions with the South Florida Science Center, as well as other major donors and business entities throughout the city. So they are working very hard. They have a bit of a working board right now, and they're working to transition into more of a fundraising board where they have folks that can raise substantial dollars in order to create that endowment. But they understand that an agreement will need to be in place for that $5 million. And that'll be another discussion item that will be coming to you shortly.
And Chris, that should also probably be a separate workshop. I mean, we've got some new members on this board. Should probably hear some of his history of NCAT. And do they have I won't say a business plan per se, but do they have a strategic plan, maybe is better, that they can share with us what they want to do and when? And also, is that $5 million, is that last money in?
Those are the details that I think need to be ironed out there, because I think the board would like perhaps some type of match on a rolling basis, where as they raise money, they could unlock a portion of that. But again, none of those items have been really ironed out yet. I think from my perspective, I would like to see them raise some dollars on the initial front end as sort of a buy-in, and then perhaps an incremental match as dollars are allocated. They do have a game plan that of what they need to do as far as bringing on or setting aside the fundraising activities initially, and also for bringing in an executive director, which that executive director would primarily be to raise dollars for the organization. But they have already raised some dollars, and they're doing what they can in order to get it kickstarted, and they keep receiving very positive support from both the philanthropic community and the business community.
Now, what is your role going to be with that organization going forward now that you're?
Yeah, I do need to speak with the city attorney about it. Historically, I've been sitting on their board, but I think I'll probably end up stepping down and taking more of an ex officio role because of the nature of being the executive director of the CRA, which will be providing funding to the West Palm Beach CAT.
Yeah, we need to avoid any appearance of impropriety.
Agreed.
Okay, Commissioner Lambert has a question.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chris. I definitely appreciate that we're taking our time with that agreement and how we're going to be utilizing the funding for this. That got me thinking about the bond funding. Do we have any restrictions on timing to utilize those funds?
I believe that there might be some timing on it. I'll have to go back and look, but unless Allison knows something that I don't, I do believe that we have to use them within a certain time frame that we'll probably need to allocate, and that would actually end up being part of the agreement, which kind of puts a timeline on the fundraising.
Yep. Okay, great. Thanks.
Is the city attorney on? Can she weigh in on that?
I am on, Mayor, and yes, there is normally a time frame for which you construct, but I will look specifically at the bond and let you know the specifics in just a few minutes if you're still on.
Okay, thank you.
But normally the projects do have a time frame for which they should be constructed.
All right, if you could get back to us on that, thank you. Okay, Mr. Rook. All the questions I see. Okay.
Yep. So this just gives you an image of the Styx Promenade that we are working on in the historic Northwest. This is very close to Heart and Soul Park and the Sunset Lounge. Clean and safe. So again, going back to the Tamarind Avenue corridor, that is a pretty big line item, $16.5 million. But it's because the revamp of Tamarind Avenue involves quite a bit of things, namely the undergrounding of power lines and making the sidewalks and street ADA compatible. Right now, there's a lot of infrastructure that is in the way that does not allow for easy access along those sidewalks. So those are all the things that we plan to update and modernize along with street trees and things like that. In addition to, there is a water main that's very near to the streetscape project that will need quite a bit of care. And that care will also, unfortunately, increase the cost of the price, but we have to ensure that we don't disrupt any kind of water service as a result of doing the streetscape project. Any other questions on that? I do want to draw a little bit of note to the wayfinding signage. I think that this is one of those very small things that we may add some additional dollars to in the future, namely to give the historic Northwest a bit of charm and just look, with things that just outline where the streets are, the stop signs, things like that, that I think would go a long way to, just making the community nice.
We do have a question from Commissioner Fox.
Thank you. I believe that in the presentation last week, when we were looking at the capital projects, there was a small amount allocated to something in the Tamarind Avenue streetscape. And I was just curious if some things are still in the general fund and some things are in the CRA, or how it's decided on those projects, if you know.
Allison just unmuted, so she probably has some details.
Yeah, there was already a commitment from the city as part of the Tamarind project for some of the utility work that's underground. So the overall project cost will be mostly CRA, but also partly funded by public utilities.
Did that answer your question, Commissioner?
Thank you. Yes.
Very good. Okay, Mr. Luke.
Clearlake corridor, most of the funding here is set aside for that agreement that was established on July 28th with Mike Mazanoff and the transit-oriented development over there on the Tri-Rail station. So you can see we have a rough estimate of 600,000. Again, I'm still waiting on the budget amounts because Public Works is doing the assessment on those dollars. That'll be step one. And then we also have the obligation to do the site plan. Although with the site planning, we believe that we can cover that site plan cost through some of the consulting line items that we have established under general uses that the CRA puts in its line items each year for operations. So those are the two main items for the Clearlake Avenue for this coming year. Okeechobee to Banyan, you've seen a lot of the construction that is going out there already. Brailsford Park, as I mentioned, the folks that are doing work in the North Railroad District, or NORA as they like to call it, really exciting stuff, and they're getting very creative and again doing another great, working on making a great place of our city. And I can see some funding requests coming from them here shortly for the CRA board to consider. But right now, we only have about 350,000 set aside, but I anticipate additional projects to come forward in that area.
What did they call it? NORA?
NORA, N-O-R-A, NORA.
So we got so at the south end, NORA at the north. Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Lambert has a question.
Thank you. I actually have a question because now seeing these totals, the total on the previous slide, I think it was 40 million, but I didn't see how those numbers added up to that. What was I missing there?
So on the,
There was about
back
3
one
pages.
slide.
It's not just that page.
Okay, thank you.
total proposed uses, yeah, that's just for the Northwest.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, great. So
and that also includes bond dollars too. You can see the ones that are noted with in red that are used for the bonds. So
okay, so this total 40,000 includes the previous total of 3 slides. Okay,
yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, again with the North, that's why I mentioned the Northwest being taking the lion's share of efforts and funding from that the CRA is currently spending.
Great.
Yep. Downtown core area. So the city does have, and I'll just go straight to 314 Clematis Street. This is a major project. The city purchased 314 Clematis Street. This was the location for a project that I had been working on for several years, and also partnering with the DDA on where we incubate small businesses to grow and establish on the street, and breaking up the 14,000 square feet on the first floor there. So we own that building now. We still, as you can see, have set aside about $3 million for the construction of that project. I anticipate that myself and the DDA, we're working on a roadmap of action that will be brought forward to the CRA for future consideration here very soon. And we'll lay out how we intend to proceed and make that project successful. I know it's been hanging out there for a little bit.
Has construction or renovation work begun?
It has not, other than I think we've done some procurement to establish the architect. And then also I believe we have done some procurement work on the contractor. So a little foreshadowing, I think it's worth also considering a private sector partner. And that's one of the items that I believe we need to bring forward for CRA board discussion. And that's in essence to keep the cost of renovation down.
Is there an interest? I mean, have we gotten any feelers?
There is, and that's part of the good news that of the folks that I've reached out to, there are a series of private entities that would be interested in partnering with the city to help us with that project. Because once we fix it, it has to operate, and that's really where the big question mark is.
Okay.
And then lastly, the DDA's work plan, and Raphael will go into this a little bit more detail, but we will set aside 4.7 for the DDA's work plan. Other target areas, Banyan Streetscape is currently underway, and that will continue to move forward, and set aside some additional business development dollars that can be used. So totaling for the downtown area is about $6 million total.
Mr. Rugg, how are we progressing with the Banyan project? Are we ahead of schedule? I know we had moved it up in order to take advantage, if you will, of less traffic because of COVID. Are we still on target for getting that done sooner rather than later?
I believe so. Allison is the project manager, so she can give you a bit more detail.
Yeah, they are, Banyan Boulevard's on track. I believe it was a total 2-year process for phase 1. So when you see this funding for Banyan Streetscape phase 2, that's for the remainder from Quadrille to Flagler. That won't start until probably 2023. So kind of on the question of the bond funding, because we know this is out to probably 2023, it gives our finance department an opportunity to invest those dollars, for a period of time, because we know we won't need them for a couple more years. So, but yes, they're running on track on Banyan Streetscape.
Okay, very good. We do have a question from Commissioner Fox.
Sorry, I didn't get this in quick enough. It was, I believe it was either the slide before or the slide before that. There was a line item for waterfront maintenance, I think. I was just curious, I don't know if that is for the new fountain or, something else with the programming, but I'm sure that everyone else knows a little bit more about this than I do. But when we have been having so many budget discussions about general fund items, I know that there were several items also relating to waterfront maintenance. So I guess I'm just trying to clarify, what are the items that can stay or have to stay in the general fund versus things that maybe could be moved to the CRA because there might be more dollars for them.
So the funding that we have set aside for Waterfront Park and City Commons it involves quite a bit of maintenance that's occurring right now, and then also a lot of events that are occurring on the city. Those probably need to be looked at with Parks and Recreation and community events. Some of them are very important, like 4th on Flagler and the Green Market. But understanding that we're, in a current pandemic, there may be some ways to adjust some of those dollars. On the, as far as the fountain goes, I believe that there are some Clematis Street dollars that will be used to finish up the fountain and help with the renovations of the Clematis Street fountain, and that'll be done going into the new fiscal year. But in addition to that, I mean, it's really that funding is keeping the park the level of service as far as cleanups and things like that at its current level. So I'm not sure how much more we can add to the maintenance of the waterfront park and City Commons, but Allison, I mean, do you have anything else to add to that?
No, other than we meet annually with the Parks Department and with community events. We've not yet met with them to establish what that budget looks like. Again, as Chris mentioned, with the uncertainty of the events, we don't know exactly how that looks, but they do break down. They have a spreadsheet. Again, Parks and Community Events has a spreadsheet that breaks down all of those expenditures, and we'll be meeting with them before the budget's finalized on what that amount is final this year.
So essentially, the CRA can pay for any of the things that are events happening downtown, or maybe you already are?
We already are.
Okay.
And they're going to be above and beyond what are our existing services.
Mayor, if I could just add real quick to that issue on the event, just to point out that, yeah, the CRA contributes a significant portion to the CRA event, to the events on the waterfront, as well as sponsorship. Sponsorship also covers a lot of the expenses of those events.
Okay.
So that pretty much concludes the city center budget discussion. Unless there's any more questions for this, I can turn it over to Raphael to go over the DDA's work plan and expenses for the coming year.
Yes, very good. I don't see any questions at this point. Raphael, Mr. Clemente.
Morning, everyone. Good to see you all. And while I queue this up, I'll say thank you to those of you who were able to join us on Thursday. And Mayor, thanks for your kind introduction at the beginning. We got tremendous feedback from the community on that downtown summit, which we typically would have done at DramaWorks. But I'm going to share that with you. We got a lot of good feedback, and we were able to respond to a lot of the comments. And some of them were pertinent to city and CRA projects, naturally. So just very quickly jumping into this, as we built this budget and looking ahead, naturally, between all the conversation already talking about the CRA budget, we know that this is a year that is going to be extraordinary, and we don't know what to expect. So we are prepared to change and flex. I'm absolutely certain we'll do budget amendments to address issues as they come. And working hand in hand with Chris, with Armando, with Allison, and obviously with all of you as the leaders of our city, the DDA is ready to make those adjustments, whatever they may be. And we do have a new 5-year work plan. This is basically, it's our scope of work that defines how we interrelate with the city and the CRA. And finally, Tiffany in my office has made a graphic which accurately depicts what I've always tried to explain, how we work. But yes, we are, and I said it, I've been saying it all year, we have never had the coordination and teamwork as good as it's been this year. And I think the necessity, obviously, of what we've seen with COVID-19, but nonetheless, the determination of everyone that I've talked to, worked with, collaborated with this year has been outstanding. And we've gotten a lot of great things done. So thanks to everyone. Jumping right into the numbers. And I'll walk you through each line here on the revenue. This top number here, current year is the blue column. Coming fiscal year is the yellow column, and then the percent change is the green column. A small increase in our ad valorem tax revenues. That's the 1 mil we levy here this year. It's $2.3 million. Year over year, prior years, we've seen in the area of 10% annual increases. This year, smaller than prior years. The second line here, interlocal second mill, that's the CRA's commitment to match the second mill that the DDA no longer levies. And then project funding is funding for work that is outside, above and beyond that 2 mil value. We made the commitment, the DDA made the commitment a few years ago to get that number down to 0, and we've continued down every year. This year it's down 6%. The DDA city interlocal number, that's funds allocated to areas of work specific to city property. This is expanding our maintenance program that we already have in downtown, pressure cleaning, landscape maintenance, et cetera, to some key areas, particularly parking garages, City Hall property. We're already there. So if we can just add that little bit more on into our existing scope of work with contractors, it can help take the load off the city staff and let them, spread it out. I talk to you all the time, all of you, and I know that the entire city is looking for more service with less money. So we're doing what we can to help achieve that outcome. Interest, we always forecast low, and then carry forwards is down from last year. This number is a little bit of a misnomer because we have to write a $2 million check to the CRA to fulfill our TIF obligation. So, you know, that carry forward money is basically a placeholder that lets us get that done. And then, of course, it comes right back to us and we put it to work in the district. And then work plan areas by expenditure or expenditure by category. In the area of business development, we beefed this up a lot this year to provide relief to our community. So this number increased from what was there when we set our budget at the beginning of the current fiscal year. We're bringing it back down to what is typically a normal year. And you'll see some areas where we have some increases. Even though the increase looks big, it's only a $10,000 increase in an overall budget here of over $1 million. But we are anticipating, unfortunately, the reality of having to work to help support commercial brokers in their efforts to fill spaces. I'm sure we've all seen the news. We're losing some of our most cherished and longstanding tenants. Pizza Girls, after more than 2 decades of being a landmark, iconic place, unfortunately is leaving our downtown. And we want to be sure that we can support those whose job it is. I mean, the brokers are the best tools we've got in terms of filling commercial spaces, and obviously keeping our incentive monies in place to help close deals if we can. But nonetheless, we're going to really focus on that area. This 12 for 12 or thoroughfare line item, that's remaining grant funding. There was foundation money from the Knight Foundation that we've just carried forward. Obviously, we hit the pause button at the thoroughfare project when COVID started. So we have some money remaining there. Business partnerships, this bottom line, that is collaborations with downtown businesses or groups of businesses when they look to do promotions or events in the district. And again, we want to be able to help them help themselves. So we've beefed that up a small amount.
Raphael, before you move off that slide, and maybe Chris or Allison can weigh in, are we in jeopardy, since we did push the pause button on the 12 by 12 project, and I know we got some grant funding, are we in jeopardy of losing that funding if we don't get this project up and going within a certain period of time? Who can speak to that?
Answer that if Chris or Allison want me to.
I mean, we are in regular contacts with Knight, and I think they anticipate, fits and starts when it comes to some of these projects, because it was the grant was made under the premise of like they were looking for new ideas that hadn't been fully vetted and challenged. So it's something that we're aware of, but luckily Knight has not asked. They're more just want updates about what the status of the project is and how we anticipate the project moving forward. So I think as long as we continue to move the project forward, Knight is very patient, luckily, and they are a great philanthropic partner.
Okay, thank you.
Exactly what I was going to say. And then in general, particularly in I should have mentioned this at the top, but in property and business incentives, facade grants, a portion of those line items are encumbered already and are in process. Grant applications are submitted, and those that are awarded or approved need to complete the project, get their CO signed, and prove that permits were fulfilled, et cetera, before they're paid out. So those monies get expended several months down the road after a project is actually approved. So some of that is encumbered already and moving into the coming fiscal year when it will be paid out to those who have been awarded those grants. Public realm maintenance, and starting right at the top, 2 of our biggest contract line items here, cleaning and pressure washing and landscape maintenance. And just to reiterate, these are private sector partners that provide these services, so not in-house staff. We just finished in each of these categories brand new RFP processes and awarded two new contracts for the coming years And we budgeted a little higher, anticipating that the bids would come in a little higher, but I'm happy to say that we got some very competitive bids and we're able to bring those numbers down a little. And then just down the list, graffiti removal, signage, capital projects. These are ongoing services that we provide to bolster what the city's already doing. Signage in particular, you see that numbers drop dramatically from over $200,000 to $50,000. In the prior year, we funded our wayfinding, our pedestrian wayfinding program, which is now in place and installed. The remaining, the $50,000 we have budgeted for the coming year is in anticipation of changing trolley routes, and we will use that money to change all those signs all throughout the district. Clean team, yes, sir.
Raphael, on the signage, by the way, very great job with the wayfinding signs. I think they are beautiful. Have you gotten any feedback? I don't know if there have been as many people on the street in light of the pandemic, but just curious what kind of feedback you may have gotten on those.
We've gotten great feedback. And a lot of it was, and I'll put it on my shoulders, was finally. But yes, we've gotten great feedback. And I think that we came in under budget. The contractor's been superb. And we're going to just keep, making sure that the signs are maintained well, et cetera.
Well, I say fantastic job with that.
Thank you very much.
We do have a question from Commissioner Neary.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Clemente, could you remind the board again, in terms of the contracts from the DDA when you're working with small businesses, let's say, for example, the cleaning and pressure wash, what's the threshold before you go to your board to allocate those resources? Or do you have it?
No, we do have a threshold. We have a series of tiers that require, bids or all the way on up to a full RFP process. So for me, I have procurement as the ED, I have procurement ability up to $50,000, but well below that threshold, we are soliciting for competitive bids. Above that threshold, we use an RFP process, which is very similar to the cities, and it goes to the DDA board for approval.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Clean team, and I'll touch on this briefly. Unfortunately, when COVID hit, the center of operations for the clean team was the DDA office. And when COVID hit, that changed everything in how we worked. So we were required to hit the pause button. Unfortunately, we're looking for other options, and I've been working closely with Armando to just be sure that we are coordinating those efforts as effectively and efficiently as we can. And we're gonna allocate that money to some program that will provide the same sort of outcomes. Unfortunately, probably minus the value add of the outreach, but we're gonna keep that money in the same place for the same purpose. And then in marketing and PR, this is one of the few areas in our budget that sees an increase, and very simply because we know once we start getting back up to speed with opening our business district, getting people back downtown, we want to be prepared to put our city top of mind and make sure that the market area knows we are back open for business. There's opportunities here. And that includes not just opportunities for visitation and customers, but opportunities for investors as well. So we have bolstered this area in looking ahead at what we think will be required for us to stay competitive in our general market area, in our region. Community and cultural, very much like the events line item. This is a line item that we've used over the years for a variety of different free, public, generally speaking, art-based types of events. We are remaining very aware of the fact that we can't do things how we typically have done them. And that's one area where if we can't expend the money in an effective manner, we'll use it in other areas. We'll make budget amendments and we'll do other things with it. But we're remaining hopeful today before we adopt a final budget that we can still do those things that have provided value to our community. Neighborhood services, and these are areas within our budget that are outcomes directly targeted at quality of life. They include transportation, our trolley system. We're even talking with, with Circuit, the electric vehicle, low-speed electric vehicle. Maybe we can supplement their work right now to offset the public's aversion to mass transit. But obviously trolley system operations, that's Yellow Line specifically. Security and policing is both of those. That's our contract with PSC, as well as money in this current year that we've allocated to help supplement policing in the downtown area. We allocated $100,000 in the current fiscal year for a new lieutenant's position downtown. And we're very proud to say that the level of policing and level of service has been very good. And we're looking forward to that continuing. But that number came down. We don't have that $100,000 budgeted again. So we lost, a little more than 100 out of that line item. Public space programs, these are targeted beautification, community enhancements that are out of the core, generally speaking, out of the core. And can we add that energy and add that quality to areas around with what is effectively our city's biggest and most populous neighborhood? There's about 10,000 residents in downtown. So we use these funds in a targeted way to make quality of life as good as it can be. And then operations, and this is broken down into a few different areas. General office, we've brought down by just over 15%. Professional services, likewise. These are all contracts. We don't have in-house attorneys or auditors. These are contract services. Surveys and studies, we've cut these line items down, the entire section here down over 30%. And then all the other items, including personnel, we've endeavored to keep as flat as possible. This is carry forward money here, board meetings, generally speaking. Personnel, we're keeping flat. Reserves, we've put a little bit back in there. We took some out this year to help fund the recovery and assistance loan program. But, and then of course, rent, you see here is and rent is all inclusive. That's not just square foot rent. That's telephones, electricity, cleaning, you name it. Anything it costs to keep a roof over our heads is all encompassed there. And our lease has a square foot rent increase and a CAM increase budgeted. So that's that increase. That's the raise there. And then by category in a pie chart. And if I was good with Excel, I would be able to put neighborhood services and public realm maintenance next door to each other. But I couldn't figure that out in time for this meeting. But 36% of these two, public realm and neighborhood services, 36% of our budget is effectively paying for tangible outcomes within our district. Marketing and PR, and then business development you see here. So operations or overhead is 26% of our budget, everything else going to outcomes in the community. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Board members, any questions? I don't see any at this time. Raphael, thank you again. Thanks to your board for being such good partners. As I mentioned when I spoke to your meeting the other day, the relationship, and I love the Venn diagram that you had earlier, the relationship among CRA, DDA, and the city, I think is a very healthy one. You guys stepped up when our businesses needed help in helping us fund a loan program at the onset of COVID. And so you are showing yourself to be, DDA is showing itself to be a tremendous partner with the city. And our downtown is our living room. And you guys are doing a great job in keeping it clean and welcome. And we are optimistic that we will have folks returning to our downtown in the near future.
Thank you, Mayor James.
Any additional questions? All right, thank you, Raphael. Mr. Rook, do you want to go to board comments and see what we have?
Yes, Mayor.
Board members, any comments at this time? Seeing none, I don't have any comments other than great job to both of you for all of you for participating in these presentations. We do have a comment from Commissioner Lambert.
Mayor, I just echo your sentiment there and just wanted to say thank you to Mr. Rugg and Ms. Justice and Mr. Clemente for meeting with me, and I understand the rest of the commissioners ahead of time. I know I took a lengthy amount of time digging into each of the numbers and line items, and this was a great overview, and I'm grateful to have it again, so thank you.
Okay.
And Mayor, if I may.
Absolutely.
Just real quick. So just to kind of summarize on some of, just as a precursor, here's just a list of things that I had talked about and mentioned that will be brought forward for future discussion, just so that everybody's kind of aware, jotting down some notes and also some things that I heard from the CRA board as far as things that you'd like to see at future meetings. So if there's anything that I missed, please let me know, and I'll work with the mayor and administration to make sure that we bring these items to you in a timely manner.
Yeah, before we leave, I don't know if the city attorney had an answer to that outstanding question about timing for projects under the bond.
No, Mayor, I'm sorry. I don't have the answer to this at this very moment. I have to get the actual bond documents pulled.
Okay.
And was unable to get my hands on those. But as soon as I do, I'll just shoot you all a message with the exact projects and the list of timeframes for those projects.
All right, very good. Thank you. Anything else, board members? I don't have anything, and so I will I will adjourn this meeting. Thank you all very much. Appreciate your participation. Great job.
Thank you.
Thank
See
you.
you all later.
Bye.